Okay, so here's what I got from the library. I'm really excited because I wasn't expecting to have all three of them at once, but I got the whole trilogy for A Good Girl's Guide to Murder, and I'm really excited because I read the first book like 3 years ago, and I enjoyed it. I thought it was fun, but I didn't actually finish the trilogy, which I hear is really good. And it goes crazy. Like, if you thought the first one was crazy, just wait till you get to the third one, and I managed to avoid basically every single spoiler there is, except for one character who sucks. So I'm really excited to actually like binge read all three of these. Hopefully this will help me get out of my reading slump that I've been in for the past like 5 months. I really like Holly Jackson as an author. I actually read Five Survive as an audiobook, and I read The Reappearance of Rachel Price as well, and I thought those were really well done. So this one's like kind of the one that she's known for. And sure, it's young adult, but I think it was really good when I last read it. It's been a couple of years, so we'll see if my opinion of it changes. I actually got 70 pages in, and I'm really liking it so far. Throughout this book, and it's already, like I said, only 70 pages in, you're seeing a lot of mess-ups in the police investigation, which I think is actually something I hope they go into a lot more. Corruption, or just kind of problems and weaknesses within how these investigations are done. Because a lot of this evidence is, I guess, circumstantial, anecdotal, maybe. It's like, you didn't get a confession because your prime suspect is dead. But just because he died doesn't mean you can close the case, because you can't actually be sure. And that's where they poke the holes in the story, and there's so many already. It's really, I like it a lot. I also think Pip as a character is really interesting. I think they've managed to write her with pretty good personality so far, and her dynamics with her friends, with Robbie, with her family is already pretty good. I'm excited for this. Okay, I just had a thought, and I need it to be in the world. And that thought is Pippa and Robbie dressing up as Holmes and Watson, respectively, for Halloween. Like, I think that's the best couple's costume. So, 3 days later, and I finished it. Unfortunately, I do have a little bit of a life, and so it took me longer than expected to finish it. But there was a point, I think, a little over halfway through, where I started it and then I finished it that same day. It's really digestible, which is what I really like about Holly Jackson's writing. I think the pacing kind of just got a little bit too fast at the end, and they did kind of rely on big confessions / info dumps. But it's like fine, because I get kind of worked out. What I really thought was interesting was that, you know, Andy wasn't murdered. She just had an accident, and then nobody helped her. It says a lot about the kind of person that she was, right? Is that, yeah, she hit her head, and that's one of my greatest fears, is hitting your head and you're fine, but then next thing you know, you're dead. Does it count for Becca that she kind of just watched Andy die? Did Andy kind of deserve it? No, nobody deserves to just die like that. She was, what, 17? But you find out that she was a really bad person. Like, she wasn't a typical high school bully. What I thought was interesting was this kind of idea of, you know, first impressions and the idea of public perception compared to personal knowledge of a person. When you start the book, it's like Andy is like so beloved, so missed and appreciated by the entire community, and Sal and his family have been ostracized entirely. And there were kind of undertones of how race and class kind of tie into that as well. You know, Andy being blonde, blue-eyed white woman, and Sal being Indian. It's that kind of thing that contributed to these public perceptions of the two of them. And when you find out what they're actually like known for personally within their friend groups, within their families, they're not. This kind of switch. Like, Andy was a bad person, Sal was a really good person. Although I do think that they went a lot more into Andy's real self than they did into Sal's, which I wish they'd kind of gone a little bit more into who Sal was, because for Sal it was mostly just, oh yeah, he was like this because this person said so. But for Andy, it was, they were finding out the kinds of things that she was doing, the people she was talking to, and then what people thought about her based on her actions that had really big effects. So I do wish there was a little bit more on like Sal as a person. Although I did think it kind of drove home the fact that, yeah, Sal was entirely innocent. Not only was he innocent in that he didn't kill Andy, but he was just picked as the scapegoat, and it was really heartbreaking. Back to the idea of public perception, it's like, yeah, in this case, you know, what the public thinks wasn't what the actual case was, but at the same time, it doesn't mean that just because you know a person, I guess it doesn't mean that you know everything there is to know about them. So with Andy, it's like her friends hated her, her sister hated her, but she was in an abusive home. With Sal, it's like everyone, his friends loved him, his girlfriend kind of, and he was known to be a good person, sure. But then there's Mr. Ward, who was very much guilty in all of the stuff that happened. He was in a position of power over her, and he tried to come off as sympathetic for what he did when, like, no, you're the adult, you're the teacher, you had more power over her, she did not seduce you. Like, it was infuriating to read him trying to defend himself because, no, every action you took was the wrong one, and you deserve to be in prison for what you did. But it's like he was Pip's tertiary father figure. And he's her best friend's dad. Like, she thought she knew him, and she was wrong because he was a bad person underneath all of that. He just, I don't know, he was convinced that he was wrong. It's interesting to know, or to see in this book, how they kind of approach those ideas of, you know, not everything is what it seems. You can't always trust the public, but you can't always trust yourself either. I do like, they didn't have to kill the dog. I know it was an accident that technically, you know, sure, like, the dog was kidnapped and then let go and then he died, but they didn't, like, as an author, they didn't have to kill off the dog. I still really like Ravi. He's underappreciated. He is underappreciated. This man is adorable. I don't care. And he's like, needs to be more beloved in the book community. Just because he's not a bad boy, okay? It's okay. You know what? Book talk and the book community has their faves. I have mine. I would like to see, you know, how Pip grows throughout the series, because I know there's more books, right? And I mean, I think this book is staying pretty decently as a standalone, but you can kind of see that Pip did piss off a lot of people, and she's uncovered quite a bit of stuff. So who knows what could happen in the next few books that are related to this. I like to think that this was like the catalyst for a lot of things happening in the next books. I mean, overall, I liked it. I liked it more than when I first read it. Like, I actually gave this one 5 stars, not because, like, mostly when I give 5 stars it's because I really, really liked it. But for this one, it's mostly just like, yeah, I liked it a lot, I enjoyed it a lot. Enough that it's like, yeah, I'll give it 5 stars for the fun of it, which is kind of different from my usual 5-star rating, so. Right, so I finished this one. It's a little bit overdue at the library, unfortunately, so I do have to, like, return it. But that one's done. And I'll get the next one, which I don't have many spoilers for the actual series. All I know is that Max ends up being worse than we thought he was, which is kind of crazy considering he was already really, really bad guy in the first book. And the general consensus as to, I guess, the quality or overall, like, enjoyment of each book is that the third one is the best and the first one and the second. The second one I actually DNF'd. I didn't get very far into it, but I think it was a factor of things that made me not read it. So I do want to give it another try. I first read it as an ebook, so who knows if having a physical copy will help. We'll see. But I'm excited. I mean, what's the actual summary for this one? Okay, interesting. So I guess I was kind of right in that she pissed off somebody. But that actually reminds me of something else I wanted to say. There's a lot of stuff regarding criticisms of, like, the police force. There is an underlying current throughout the entire book that it wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for this. So it's still something important to talk about. I liked it. I would have liked it if it was a little different. This summary says the police won't do anything, and I'm like, yeah, that checks. That checks out. You know, true crime, superhero movies, stuff like that, they always have the police be really incompetent. We'll see how that one goes, though.
3 days later.
As a little update, I am over halfway done. I feel like the pacing is a little bit slow compared to the first book. As it unfolds, it's been very interesting because you're wondering, okay, what happened to this guy? Why is he getting so weird lately? And what does that have to do with his disappearance? It's a really cool premise so far, but I don't know. It just feels like so much happens, but nothing happens. I have a feeling I'm gonna get slapped in the face with an ending.
6.5 hours later.
Okay, so I finished Good Girl, Bad Blood. Baby, now we got bad blood. When I said that I thought the pacing was a little bit slow, what I meant was that so much was happening, but not much information was being revealed. I felt like I was at a stalemate. I was like, okay, what am I supposed to suspect or expect? Second thing, I ate my words immediately after saying that, because there's a point about like 80% in this book where shit just goes down? Like, what? I was really confused. Because how do you just get that out of nowhere? I mean, there wasn't any foreshadowing, it's just something completely random. But at the same time, I was really hooked. I was like, wait, that's insane. I think the way it was done, like the whole thing with like Child Brunswick, I was like, oh my god, this is crazy and this is awesome. The one piece that was missing that tied everything together. When it came to finding out who it was, I mean, I want to say I was a little bit disappointed. He was kind of just there. He said some stupid stuff and then, I don't know, it didn't feel like he was that relevant until he was, and it was insane. I read it all immediately at like 12 in the morning last night, and I was going insane. Jesus Christ. Like, one thing about Holly Jackson is that when she wants something fast-paced, she will have something be fast-paced. I felt the same reading 5 Survive, where I was just like on edge the entire time I was reading it, just from the way it was written. I also really like Pip's character progression, because throughout the book she's kind of like, I'm not who I was back then when I was doing that investigation, so I'm gonna go back to being a good student and all that stuff. But you can see her kind of slipping, and there's a point where she realizes, no, that whole good girl student who's like a hard worker or whatever, that's not who she is. It's what she was doing to hide who she really was. And what I think is interesting is that we still don't know what kind of person Pip is. We know that she's full of rage right now because of everything that happened with the trial, and that's perfectly valid. I think she could have done worse. But I'm not quite sure what it is about her exactly. The only thing I know about her is that she has a huge savior complex, which honestly, you could not have this series without her huge savior complex. So it's a little bit annoying. Speaking of that, I think her reaction after the whole thing with Stanley and Charlie and the house, I thought it was a lot like Katniss at the end of Mockingjay. They also messed around with the format of the book a lot to kind of drive home that shock and trauma that she was feeling. And I thought it was really well done. I don't think this is something she's going to be able to come back from, because like regardless of what you think about Stanley, the fact is someone fully died in her arms. It's gonna mess with her head. So I really like how it's being done, and I hope this is something that carries through to the 3rd book, kind of figuring out how she is with this trauma now that she has, and with the acceptance that she doesn't want to be that person that follows the rules and everything. I think I was expecting more of a connection to the first one, where I thought that in her investigation in the first book, she probably pissed off a couple of people who would then show up in this book or in the next book, but it's not quite that. I mean, there's like connections between all of the books, but I think it's mainly just like, oh yeah, the main character is Pip and she solves mysteries in her hometown, which is fine. And there are some connections, like the whole thing with Luke, the whole like drug thing is something that I thought they would get into a lot more, but Luke wasn't like the bad guy, right? I thought it was great. I'm really excited for the 3rd book, because I hear it's a lot darker than the rest of them. So we'll see how it goes, and I feel like we need closure when it comes to freaking Max. I hate that guy so much. It's fine. That actually reminds me, there's a scene where Pip and Robbie are just like on the street, and they see Max across the street, and he kind of like smirks at them like, I won, and Pip is about to like yell at him, but Robbie gets there first and he's like, you stay away from her. It's like the bare minimum, but Robbie is just, I am in love with him, and I'm really excited for the show. Robbie makes me think of Wes from Better Than the Movies, in the sense that he's so perfect that it's like, he's kind of a shallow character, like not that much obviously, because he had the whole thing in the first book, and a little bit in the 2nd book when it comes to his brother and everything that he's gone through since like in those 5 or 6 years. But like, he's just so perfect. But he's a good palate cleanser. Like, you know what? I sometimes just want to read about a perfect man, and that's okay. This man is too perfect. And so, I mean, I love Robbie. I love him so much. I'm like half expecting him to do something bad in the 3rd book, because he's just been so perfect the entire time. I'm like, we can't have nice things. Something's gonna happen and I'm scared. But I don't think he's gonna ever be like a bad guy. I don't know, like he couldn't do that. Yeah, I mean, on to the 3rd one, I guess.
One eternity later.
Hold on a second.
few moments later.
I think that's like a machine from my basement that does that in the middle of the night. Okay. Every time, every single thing I've said in my review for the first book, or like in the second book, I said maybe, has come to bite me in the ass as I'm reading this. Barney. I thought, I was like, you didn't have to kill the dog though. Like, he could have lived. And she's like, bet. Don't get me wrong. Like, we hated this guy already. But the dog, bro, I knew that dog. I knew that guy. Don't talk to me.
3:28 a.m.
It is 4:26 a.m. I just finished the book. Oh my god. Oh my god. Hey Sarge, remember me? 3 minutes.
See, what I was not expecting last night, okay, here's the story, okay? So it was the middle of the night, it was almost 12 o'clock. And I have this little app where I check off things that I want to do in a day, and it's kind of like a to-do list, kind of like a self-care thing. And one of the things it said was read a book for fun. And I realized, oh, I hadn't read any of my book yet today. And it was 12 o'clock. I was like, okay, I'll read like 10 pages. I'll read 10 pages and then I'll go to sleep. Next thing I know, it's 5 in the morning, book is done, my chest hurts, and I'm sitting there wondering, how do you learn how to write like this? Like, it's like everything I've said in any other video that I recorded has come back to bite me in the ass. Because, where do I even start, okay? When I said at the beginning of the second book that I thought it seemed more like the series was related to a character progression rather than like plot progression, where we're just following Pip around rather than, I guess, everything being connected in terms of all the mysteries that she's been solving. No, turns out it's all connected somehow. And I mean, it did kind of come out of nowhere, but it's done in a way that, like, everything with the DT killer was like, oh, that ties everything together now. Nothing that had happened in a previous book was random. And that's pretty cool. It was just that kind of thing that I was expecting to already know about when I was starting the second book, rather than figuring it out halfway through the third book. But I still really enjoyed that. What was the next thing? When I said they didn't have to kill off Barney, I was like, you don't have to kill off the dog for shock value. Granted, it was still for shock value, but it did also come back, because I thought that was kind of relatively weak, where Becca let go of Barney and he just happened to die. I was like, really? In this universe where everything is so planned out and everything is so intentional, he just died randomly? No. And it was just crazy. I think I really enjoyed the pacing of this one, because it just starts off crazy from the get-go and it just keeps on going, and it just gets crazier and crazier, honestly. And I really liked it. I thought there was kind of this progression where you can see that from Pip being traumatized from what happened in the second book to kind of being obsessed with finding that person that she was in the first book. But the thing is that the first book Pip was not really her. And even at the end of the series, I don't think we can get a sense of who the true Pip is because of everything she's gone through. But we know that she's really ambitious, we know that she's really smart, and she sees things through to the end. And that's really admirable. Granted, maybe not in terms of murdering someone and covering it up and framing someone else. But like still, the traits on their own are they're really good. And I think the only thing is kind of, there's no way that after everything she's not still affected by it, so it's kind of insinuated that she just goes off to college and it's fine. But I'm like, that definitely still affected her, and it's just something that isn't really talked about. There's a bit of a time skip, I guess, like it's kind of just showing like what she's going through after the decision she made, oh my god, with her friends and family and stuff. And then the the ending, "Hey Sarge, remember me," 3 minutes after the verdict. I can't believe. Robbie, he's so unrealistically perfect, and I wish he was real. I want one like him. He's so funny. He uses humor in the wrong places when he's nervous. But like, he and Pip have that really good chemistry where they just bounce ideas off each other. Oh my god, everything with Charlie, everything with the gun and the blood on her hands, it just kept recurring. And I think that's something that Holly Jackson is really strong at, where a lot of people might find it repetitive, those kind of sentences that she puts in very often, but they serve a purpose, and it's kind of those intrusive thoughts that just keep coming in. They don't care whether you think they're repetitive, they're just gonna keep showing up. It's like in 5 Survive, which I won't spoil, but the 2 shots in the back of the head, I remember that one was really noticeable listening to it as an audiobook. It was said over and over and over again, and that came back. That was really important. And in this case, it's not something that she's thinking a lot that ends up coming back, but rather, I mean, she did see a man die in her arms, and it was something unjust, and there was nothing she could really do about it. And considering Pip's savior complex, like, it had a really, really bad effect on her. And once she starts getting stalked herself, the paranoia gets really, really high, right? Because she's been through so much. And it's interesting how the book kind of goes into the injustice of the police force and how it's not actually that fair. I mean, within the trilogy, you have 2 people who were innocent of a crime who were found guilty. And it's so humiliating. I had an alarm and it just turned off, and this is something I had said when I first read A Good Girl's Guide to Murder. This was like 2 years ago. I was like, yeah, police are incompetent, sure, but they can't be that bad. But I am an avid BuzzFeed Unsolved watcher, and the amount of times that they're like, oh yeah, the police just like didn't follow up on this thing, or they scrapped some evidence, or there might have been a cover-up, like, it is a thing that happens. And with someone like, for example, like with Max Hastings, who is rich and influential, it's like, yeah, you can get away with anything. She goes to the police, and even she understands that what she's saying sounds wrong. And when you consider that compared to her knowing the truth, her having evidence, and her being set in what she knows, she still wasn't believed by the police, or the justice system still found Max not guilty. And it's like, well, yeah, she can't trust Hawkins with some vague idea. That guy sucked, by the way. And so she kind of goes through things herself, but it's really dangerous to pursue that route when you're young, and I mean, everything that happens to her after that is crazy. I mean, she starts kind of investigating, and there's a point halfway through the book where you think she's got the killer kind of, you think she's won, or she's got a one-up on him, and then he fully kidnaps her and tries to kill her. And it's like, we're halfway through the book. I thought this was gonna happen at the end. What is she gonna be doing for the rest of the book? Is she killing more? You know, things like that. I fully believed that Pip was gonna kill Max Hastings. Like, I knew she killed a guy, because I did get spoilers, but I thought it would be Max, not Jason. And it was so interesting the way it played out, because it was like, yeah, everything was going to according to his plan, the way it had done with all his previous victims, but Pip made it out, and the way they described that was so intense. And I was just waiting for her to fail, waiting for him to come back, but also hoping that she'd just make it out alive. And she did. And that's where I think it gets really interesting, how they try to have this discussion on like morality, and when it comes to like killers and crimes and things like that. There's this almost idea that you can't really call anyone a monster, but then they kind of go back on that idea. It's particularly with Stanley and Charlie from the second book, where Stanley was just a kid when he was kind of an accessory to a serial killer. He was only 10 years old, and then there comes a question of, can you really hate him for that when he was being used? When he was, not only was he a minor, but he was like young. It's not like he was 17, no, he was 10 years old. And you know he tried to make a good life for himself, but at the same time you can understand someone wanting that revenge, knowing that he's still out there, thinking that the justice system didn't do his job. And that's where I guess it kind of gets blurry, and I really hoped they would go a little bit more into that, and I guess they kind of did. But everything with Jason was like, he was always a bad guy. I mean, they kind of insinuated or assumed, based on the investigation from the first book, that he was at the very least emotionally abusive. And so when it turns out that he's a serial killer, it's like, okay, yeah, this guy just is awful. And the interactions that he has with Pip is very kind of incel behavior, I guess, which is where I was hoping there would be kind of commentary on, you know, like, incels don't just come out of nowhere. They're kind of like bred from toxic ideas, right? And there's, I don't think, at least I don't think, that any killer is a monster. I think it doesn't make any sense to dehumanize serial killers or terrorists or anything like that, because by doing that, you're detaching yourself and you're detaching everyone else from them, and you can't kind of take accountability for the way that the system tends to build these kinds of people. The system could be like any type of ideal, and when it becomes something extreme, then you have someone who's violent. And I think that's something that they almost touched, but then they didn't really, and so I was kind of just a little bit disappointed by that. But I can understand that these books were really written from the place of a woman who wants to talk about the lack of justice for women who are victims, and how often they're not believed and how often they're not taken seriously. I mean, how much of this can we argue that Pip is just considered emotional, that she's just, you know, traumatized, or she's just a young girl who doesn't know what she's doing? That's kind of her experience, and her understanding that she wasn't wrong, that she, despite being emotional, well, not even despite, but even with her emotional state, even with her trauma, she was still right. And so it doesn't make sense to dismiss emotion as something that means you can't be taken seriously. So I thought that was, like, that's valid, and as well as talking about the lack of justice, especially when it comes to rape cases. But I do think they could have gone back into that morality thing. I think it would have been just, like, a bit too much to go into, so she did go into it a little bit. And when you think about the character of Pip herself, it's like, the way that they wrote the actual scene of her killing Jason, it's like, no, it wasn't that he was about to kill her and she whacked him in the back of the head and like one knock and he was done. That's not what happened. She had fully escaped. She was fully about to just leave, and then he comes back. He doesn't know that she's escaped yet, and she goes back to him and kills him. And I thought that was really interesting, because it really shows that, and she even talks about it, it wasn't self-defense. Because self-defense would have been she's running in the woods, he goes after her, he finds her, and then she kills him. But no, she fully went back. It was that decision to turn around and go back that made it not really into self-defense. And considering everything that happened with the police force, she knew that she wouldn't be taken seriously. She knew that, oh, the DT killer is in prison. What do you mean that's a DT killer? And knowing that she's been increasingly unstable, no, you can't define that as clear self-defense. This, like, she had a motive to kill him that was fully that she wanted to kill him. But at the same time, he was a serial killer. Like, if she didn't kill him, he would do it to her and who knows how many other people. And that's where that question of morality did come up. And I liked that perspective of it. I think I was just hoping for it to be also touched upon in a slightly different angle, in a way that it was in the second book, but not in the third book. In fact, I think the whole thing with Charlie Green is a little strange. I mean, I do think she should have hated him a little bit more for what he had done. But she had a lot of sympathy for him, which is fair, but I think she could have had a little bit less. I'm kind of winded, oh my gosh. I have so many opinions about this because it was so incredibly intense. And I think the craziest thing is that all of her friends, even like Ravi and everything, were quite literally willing to help her hide a body. And it's kind of that, oh, you know, tag someone, you'd help bury a body. No, they fully did. And her plan / decision to frame Max was amazing. I've actually seen a Goodreads review was like, did you really have to frame him for murder? I'm like, he needs to be in bars. He's not safe. He's not a safe person. And like, I mean, it was efficient. It worked. And I think the funny part was when he was being arrested and he runs off and he kind of attacks her. He's like, you did this. And she's like, you're lucky I didn't put you on the ground too. Like, queen. I really hope she got some sort of therapy after that though. But jeez, like that was iconic. And we're happy to see Max in jail. Although you don't really find out until like the literal last page. Speaking of literal last page, hey, sorry for remembering me. Oh my god. Ravi not only matches Pip's freak. He surpasses her freak. She breaks up with him because she's like, if they find out that Max is not guilty, they know that I lied, they know that you lied for me, so I'm gonna... She's all like, oh, I'm gonna pretend that I was an awful person to you and you were coerced, you were under duress, whatever. And he's like, what if we just get married and have spousal privilege? We don't deserve Robbie as a character. Pip does not deserve him as a boyfriend. Literally, the existence of him, even though it's fictional, God bless that we got Robbie. I love Robbie so much. And he literally did nothing wrong. Like, it's literally unreal. I could argue, I guess, that why would you write such an unrealistic character? But I love him so much. Yeah, I mean, speaking of the gang though, I still think that Ant and Lauren were kind of I don't think they had to be that way. I think it was kind of just to start a little bit of drama that they ended up being such jerks to Pip. So I thought that was one of the only things that was kind of unnecessary. Kara. I like her. I like Connor. But I feel like, I don't know, they're not as developed as someone like Nat or even Jamie or Becca or Daniel. I don't know, it seems like there were some people who were a little bit more background characters who had more character progressions than the actual friends, aside from Aunt and Lauren, who just became awful. So I mean, that's another thing, but I think overall it was just so fast-paced. It was so enthralling to read. I mean, my chest was hurting at the end of that. I was kind of like, what? This is all of Holly Jackson's books that I read. I mean, I haven't read her novella, but I think she's a really, really strong writer, and she's really good at kind of tightening things up, even though it's a little unrealistic. It's another skill that no writer can have, is just being able to have everything just fit together, whereas this one it feels like she kind of bends everything so that it fits, but it does, and it's amazing. So I really do like her books, and I liked Five Survive, I liked The Reappearance of Rachel Price, so I don't know, I don't know if I actually want to buy these books, because I feel like I understood some of the foreshadowing. I don't know how many times I could go back to it and be like, oh, this was that. And I don't think I could ever have that experience of reading it for the first time again. So I don't know if this is a book that I would buy, but it was a series. I loved it and I adored it. And I would like more like that. I always love a female main character who goes crazy and unhinged and kind of evil. But I don't know, I don't think I'll actually read this one again. Hi, so I'm here editing this video after 3 months, something like that. And I wanted to say a couple things just to finish off the video. First of all, I ran out of storage as I was filming that last clip, which is why it kind of just cuts off and I wasn't able to wrap things up the way I wanted to. Second, I did a lot of rambling. I did not have a script, and I don't want to have a script. But I think ultimately what I was just trying to say is that this series really comes from the heart. You can tell that Holly Jackson really cares about the issues surrounding domestic and sexual abuse and how difficult it can be to get justice for those cases. Even though the series is really a murder mystery series, the fact that there's so much regarding how hard it is for victims to be believed in more than one scenario in the book, you can tell that it's almost like a female rage type of book. Not almost, it is a female rage type of book, and I feel like very often female rage is really just stems from a woman's desire to be heard and believed and taken seriously. And so Pip as a character really goes through that. She has that idea that I have to be believed, I need justice to be served, but people aren't going to do that, so I have to do it myself. And that's very valuable. I think it's very valid, and as someone who loves female rage, I had a great time. So that theme, I think, is its most important theme, and I liked the way it was addressed. I think there is a secondary theme that is about morality and how we can't always trust our judgment of what is good, what is bad, what does it mean for someone to be good or evil. This is especially in the case of Stanley and Charlie, where Stanley was innocent, but he also wasn't. He was an accessory to a crime, but he was also a child. So it's one thing that we can grieve Stanley, we can be heartbroken for him for trying so hard to have a good life after what he'd have been through. We can also understand why Charlie did what he did. Although we don't agree with it, we can kind of see why he did it. And I thought that was so well done, but then when they bring up Jason as a character, I feel like that just kind of contradicts that theme. So as interesting as I thought he was as a villain, I was thinking that it would be so interesting to have had a bit of a conversation on how is it people can grow up to end up with those kinds of toxic ideas, to end up as misogynistic and controlling as he is. Kind of not in the same way as Andy, where sure we thought she was just a bad person, but it turns out she had the right motives, but in a way that we can see what kind of things happen to make someone think that way, and what can we do as readers or people who are alive to prevent that kind of thing. I think that would have made it a lot stronger, especially tying into the original theme of misogyny, of the systems that make it so that women aren't believed in the first place. I think that was what I was trying to rant about, and I think I managed to word it a little bit better now. But like I said so many times in that video, I loved this series, but I don't think I'll be reading it again. I think it's one of those ones where the shock factor was huge. So maybe I'll read it once to see how much foreshadowing I can catch. Or maybe I'll just get into reading different mysteries and thrillers, because I only realized this year that it was a genre that I was really fascinated by. So I think that's about it.